And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country.
My name is John, and the International Criminal Court is now in session. It is November 22nd, 2025, and once again we are going to talk about the situation in Ukraine. But first, I want to mention that today is the 62nd anniversary of President John Fitzgerald Kennedy's assassination. Rest in peace to him. Glorious martyr. So anyway, let's get into it. First of all, we are going to talk about the situation in the Zaporizhzhia direction. The Russians have continued their advance to the town of Gulay-Pulay, which is right here in the Zaporizhzhia Oblast. And as far as I'm concerned, the Russian advance is still going as expected. After the capture of Danilovka, the Russians then moved to the villages of Nechaivka and Radisny. Now, in a recent update by Syriac Maps and AMK Mapping, they claim that Guy and Danilovka are back under AFU control. But here's the problem. There is no evidence to prove these claims. So for that reason, I am going to press X to doubt on that. But I digress. The Russians then continue moving down south, and as far as I'm concerned, Novye Zaporizhzhia, a village that goes to Gulay-Pulay, southwards that is under Russian control. It was captured by the Russians last night, and the next village for the Vostok group to capture is Dobropila, and then after that one, it will be Varvarovka, and that will be it. They will be on their merry way to Gulay-Pulay. And to the east, the villages of Zeleny Gai and Vysoke are under Russian control. Now, for a little bit of history, the Russians actually captured Zeleny Gai and Vysoke during the initial invasion in early 2022. But then the armed forces of Ukraine pushed them back from Gulay-Pulay and these villages. And they managed to hold them off within the southern outskirts of Gulay-Pulay. Like, the Russians were able to see the town from a distance, but they just weren't able to enter it. It was too well defended. But now, the Russians have gone around the original defensive positions of the armed forces of Ukraine in this area, and they seem to be slowly but surely encircling it. Just like how they're doing things right now in other parts of the whole line of combat contact. So as far as I'm concerned, in the next 1 to 2 weeks from now, definitely before Christmas, we're going to see the start of the battle for Gulay-Pulay. Now, how long do I think it's going to last? I think realistically 1 to 2 months. There's a definite possibility it could go into 2026. But I'm sure at the latest it will end in either February or March of 2026. That is, of course, if the Russians don't sign any bad peace deals offered to them by a soon-to-be lame duck president. But anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. So the Battle of Gulay-Pulay is about to start. And yeah, I recommend to keep your eyes peeled here, and also on the areas too within the Dnipropetrovsk region. Ukrainians are definitely going to try to slow the Russian advances down as much as possible, because with Pokrovsk apparently now captured, which I'll mention in a bit, that is, they're going to definitely send their guys to the Zaporizhzhia region in order to save the town of Gulay-Pulay. Or perhaps they're going to try to deploy them to the town of Orikhiv or Orikov. Or even to the city of Zaporizhzhia. Because if Gulay-Pulay falls, Orikhiv is cooked. So effectively, the Ukrainians are going to probably now start sending their guys to Zaporizhzhia to defend the city from a Russian takeover. Because if no peace deal is signed in the next, month or so, it's definitely possible that by summer of next year, the Russians are probably going to be in Zaporizhzhia city. And that alone will probably lead to the final downfall of President Vladimir Zelensky. Now, anyway, let's move further east. So nothing going on in the Novopavlovka front, but in the city of Pokrovsk, finally, fucking finally, after 2 to 3 months of clashes within the suburbs and the countryside, the Russians have officially captured the city of Pokrovsk. Ladies and gentlemen, it is official. Krasnaya Amisk has fallen to Russia. For the first time since 1991, the Russians controlled this city, and as far as I know, they're not done yet. Mayanograd is still partly under Ukrainian control, but I don't know how much longer that's going to last. The Ukrainians have no more ways to get into the city. All of the major supply routes are cut. Literally, everything from the north, especially from the town of Rodinske, has been cut. And yeah, there's literally no way out for them. Like, look at this. Look at this massive gray zone here. Like, this is complete bonkers. In a way, this may be an even worser encirclement than Mariupol. Or the Azovstal, like, a complex. Because, let me take you all back in time, just like with, the Gule-Pule front, okay? Now, a long time ago, like 3 years ago that is, the Russians were clashing with the AFU for the city of Mariupol. And, very early on, because of the lack of preparation and reliable defensive positions by the AFU, the Russians were able to encircle the city of Mariupol on all sides. The Ukrainians had no way out of the city. Eventually, the Russians took the main part of Mariupol, all of its suburbs, all of its neighborhoods, the commie blocks, everything. Everything was seized by the Russians, except for one place, Azovstal. The Ukrainians were held up in this place here for an entire month, and then by the near end of May, they surrendered. Mariupol fell to Russia in May 2025. I mean, not 2025, May 2022. And from that point on, the Russians then reconcentrated all their efforts on trying to deal with the rest of Donetsk region, along also with the Kharkiv direction too, which we all remember didn't work out for the Russians. So, moving back to the present, Mayanograd is encircled, just like Azovstal was. But there's a big difference this time. You see, with Mariupol, nobody could really blame them because the invasion caught them off guard. But here, this is just inexcusable. The armed forces of Ukraine had weeks, literal weeks, to get their men out of the city, out of both Pokrovsk and Mayanograd. The Russians are coming, and there's literally nothing you can do. Just get out. Withdraw. Fight another day. But they didn't. You know why? Because of ego. President Zelensky and Syrskyi have become so deluded to the point where they are convinced of their own victory that was hyped up by the mainstream media and the Ukraine fanboys on Twitter X. They've become so convinced that they could defeat Russia that by losing this city here, they would just be exposing themselves as complete phonies. Now, pardon me if I sound like a particular protagonist from Catcher in the Rye, but the fact of the matter is, President Zelensky is a fraud, a phony, someone who's not meant to be taken seriously at all. Yet, he thinks he's much bigger than he really is. The armed forces of Ukraine, just like in Azovstal, are going to lose the city of Mayanograd. And once that happens, the gates of hell are going to open. Literally. Nothing will stop the Russians from wanting to go to Dobrapila next, which is up north here, and also westward towards the Oblast of Dnipropetrovsk. Nothing will stop them. So if I'm the armed forces of Ukraine, I would be punching myself right now in the face because you're losing a lot of guys here. And this disaster alone tells you that the AFU is not just no longer capable of winning the war, like it's no longer capable of winning the war in Ukraine, but there's a real possibility now, especially because of the manpower shortages, that they're not even going to be able to freeze the conflict. In fact, that is why Donald Trump is trying so hard to get Putin to stop. Because he knows within the next 1 to 2 years, the armed forces of Ukraine just might collapse throughout the entire eastern half of the country. And the Russians might be able to advance all the way up to the left bank of the Dnieper River, taking cities like Chernigov, Sumy, Poltava, East Kiev from the armed forces of Ukraine without a fight. Or like little fighting. Seriously. So, but getting back to the map though. Sorry if I slipped up for a moment. The Russians have now broken out of the city of Pokrovsk. They are in the process of taking control of the suburb of Rivne and have broken into Mayanograd from the west, along with the village of Svitli. So all of these fields here can now pretty much be considered a gray zone or Russian control. I don't think there's any armed forces of Ukraine left in southern Mayanograd. They're all gone. As far as I'm concerned, I think like one half of Mayanograd is now under Russian control. These commie blocks, these northeastern neighborhoods, and the southern neighborhoods, they're all under Russian control. The central part of the city is all that's left. And considering how many FABs have been dropped on here, I honestly don't know how many Ukrainian men are still alive. And also in other news, the assault on Rodinske has been repelled largely by the Russians, so they keep majority control of the town. And then going further up north, the Russians continue their push to capture the village or town of Shakove, though it is not yet confirmed whether or not if they were able to capture it from the Ukrainians. The Russians also continued their push on the TO-504 road from Pokrovsk to Konstantinovka, and then within the proper Konstantinovka direction, the village of, or the town of Ivanopila, which is one of the suburbs of Konstantinovka, has fallen to Russian control. The entire place is now under Russian control, and I honestly don't know why Playfra is still flirting with the idea that these villages are not even under complete control, let alone Toretsk. It's complete copium. And in the city of Konstantinovka itself, the Russians are now finally starting to push properly. I mean, now with Ivanopila now taken, nothing can now stop the Russians now from properly advancing. They can now actually enter the city of Konstantinovka and consolidate. So the battle has effectively now reached its main phase. So the battle for the outskirts are all but finished, except for, of course, Barystok and Ilanivka, but otherwise, the Battle of Konstantinovka has now taken its full shape. Now, in the Siversk direction, Zvanovka has fallen to Russian control. This is like one of the last villages before you enter the town of Siversk. And then, going further to the west, big news here. This is probably one of the biggest captures like all of 2025. I know a lot of Ukraine fanboys will say, oh, this is nothing, it's not a regional capital. But if we're talking about Donbas itself, it is big. The town of Yampol has been recaptured by Russia. It was initially taken by the Russians during the 2022 invasion, and the Ukrainians took it back in September of 2022 during the Kharkiv counteroffensive. And as far as I'm concerned, the Russians also control all the swampy areas outside of Yampol too. So, yeah, the road between Siversk and Limon has now officially been cut, which effectively means that the armed forces of Ukraine are now encircled from like 1, 2, 3 and 4 sides. There's like one more road left out of the city of Liman, but it's not a very reliable road, especially when you got to cross the Sovetski Donets River. Now, looking at the Liman front here, the village of Stavki is under Russian control, pretty much. The majority of the whole village is under its control. And then going further to the west, Novoselivka is also now under complete Russian control. And then going northward, that is, a little more of the city of Kupiansk has been taken by the Russians as well. The Russians recently announced the capture of Kupiansk, but if you ask for my opinion, I don't think there is enough evidence to suggest that a full capture is real. And the fact that we don't have any evidence of any Ukrainian successes in this area, like their attempts to counterattack, it leads me to believe that their attempts to try to retake the western part of the city have failed. So, as of this video, 80% of Kupiansk is under Russian control. And lastly, more of the city of Volchansk has been taken by the Russians. And we can expect the battle to probably be over by the start of next month in December. So expect perhaps the fall of Kupiansk and Volchansk in December of 2025, without a doubt, along with maybe Siversk. Liman, that's kind of a 50-50 chance alongside Gule-Pule, but it's possible. Konstantinovka, I think that one's going to go into 2026, but otherwise, I think by the end of the year, we're going to see the captures of Siversk, as I said, along with Kupiansk, Volchansk, and maybe Liman and Gule-Pule. So yeah, Russia is going to end the year very strong. And they'll have definitely a much stronger hand going into 2026, especially with the possibility of a new offensive to reverse everything they lost in the Kharkiv direction. And that's going to do it for today's video. I hope all of you found it informative and enjoyable. Tell me in the comment section below what you think of the recent advances, and I will see you all next time.